Hello, everybody. My name is Adam Bergman. Thank you so much for tuning in. As we know, March 15th, Palantir UK is going to go head-to-head in a Royal Rumble fight with Foxglove to talk about the merits of Palantir Foundry and how it can help the NHS and transform into a federated data system, how they can transform the NHS to become more efficient, therefore saving lives and reducing patient time and becoming more efficient with the money that you have because you don't have to do manual work when you can rely on Palantir Foundry. I found a ridiculously good interview, and I really have to play this for you. Yesterday, I played you an interview about actually a Palantir employee at Palantir UK talking about how Palantir Foundry actually works. In today's interview, I will be going over an interview of Becky. Becky works at the University of Hospitals in Northamptonshire, and Becky is the Group Director for Transformation and Quality Improvement. And Becky will go into 100% concrete facts. This is not me saying it. This is not a Palantir employee saying this. This is not a YouTuber saying this. This is not a troll saying this. This is literally somebody that's dealing with Palantir Foundry in a pilot program. She works for the NHS, middle management for NHS. And she specifically is going to connect the dots talking about data and how Palantir Foundry actually works to reduce wait times and save lives. Not my words, her words. And it's very, very important that we watch this video so we actually understand Palantir actually works. Dr. Alex Karp always compares us to the Excel sheets, us to the PowerPoints, us to people that are 5 years behind us. Why? Because while they're talking about concepts of what can happen and how it could work, Palantir is battle tested and they actually work. She's going to go over to talk about the problems. Quick note. She says that every single hospital works independently from another hospital, and all of the departments within the hospitals work independently from the other departments in that hospital. She says because of that, we either have too much data and we don't know what to do with it. We can't comb through it and we can't make it make sense. We can't make the data actually work for us. Or we have too little data and we don't have enough data points to make something work, to make something viable. So it's either too much data and we don't know how to comb through the important data that we actually need, or too little data and we don't have enough data to make something work. And then she shows a chart. This chart is remarkable. This is the chart before using Palantir Foundry, and then they had a placebo group, and then they had a group that was using Foundry. The placebo group not using Foundry, productivity went like this, and the group using Foundry, the productivity went like this. Literally, it went in opposite directions, like this, showing you proof and data that Palantir actually works. I'm not going to bore you to death and give you guys the synapse of this interview because it is going to be around 15 minutes between the actual presentation and questions, but it's absolutely freaking remarkable. And she was asked one specific question at the end. Do you have data privacy concerns? She says, yes, naturally I have concerns. However, we have a lot of data privacy governance on board. She's like, I would prefer NHS to handle this. However, we are not capable whatsoever, and we need to leave it at the hands of the data software companies that are experts in this field. And she says, for me personally, these are not my words, these are Becky's words, and you're going to hear it in this interview. She says, for me personally, the benefits far outweigh the risks when it comes to patient care, saving lives, so on and so forth. I really hope you guys enjoyed this interview, and I'm not asking for a comment for the algorithm, but I am asking for a comment, a share, a like, whatever you can do, because right now, this battle on March 15th, data and facts is not going to win this alone. We need to have perception. And the only way to do perception is to go on a media campaign, a media blitz. And believe it or not, social media is one of the greatest roads to becoming a champion when it comes to a debate. Perception is a huge part of a debate. Perception is a huge part of a battle. So if we could increase the eyes and ears on this video, and specifically on Becky's interview and the video that I came out with yesterday. By the way, if you missed the video yet from yesterday, click on the link up above. Then maybe, just maybe, it's going to make the debate with Foxglove just a little bit easier. All they care about is not giving the contract to Palantir, because of course Palantir, although it saves lives, both medically and militarily, defending our borders and borders, defending both the United States borders and the United States allies' borders, but at the end of the day, it was co-founded by Peter Thiel, chummy friend of Donald Trump, and one of the largest supporters and donors of the Republican Party. So therefore, Palantir cannot possibly win a contract, although they are best suited to win such contract. Do you understand the absolute shitty hypocrisy that we have in front of us? When the actual NHS is saying Palantir works, it literally works. We're not using Palantir for some schemy shit. Palantir works, in the words of the actual field workers of the NHS. So please make sure to watch the video, like the video, share the video, comment on the video so that more people can have eyes and ears on this amazing, amazing piece of data. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it and enjoy the rest of your weekend.
Hello. Hi, I'm Becky. I'm Director of Transformation and Quality Improvement at Kettering and Northampton Hospitals. Super. Shall I get going?
Go for it.
Super. So thank you. As said earlier, we wanted to talk today about integrating care across our hospitals. So we are 2 hospitals in Northamptonshire. You will be aware from the news, and it was in your charts at the beginning, our biggest issue is our elective waiting list. And we are working across our 2 hospitals as what we call in the NHS an elective care collaborative to help address what that looks like. And how can we minimise waiting times? How can we make sure if we've got a longer waiting time in one of our 2 hospitals, how can we make sure we share that across the system? However, we have 2 sets of systems that don't talk to each other because we 2 separate hospitals, 2 separate clinical systems, 2 separate operating theatre systems, really difficult to get some of that information. So we can't see what our waiting list and capacity to treat patients is across Northamptonshire. So we joined the Trust CCS programme, the Trust Care Coordination System programme, to help us with that visibility of what is our waiting list across our whole system and what capacity have we got. And my experience of working with data in the NHS, you either have nowhere near enough data or far too much data. And I think we've got instances of both of these in how do we manage our wait, or where we were in terms of managing our waiting list. So if I think about our information around how effectively our operating theatres are running, our teams don't have or didn't have access to that data, can't see, it's Mr. Smith on a Friday who always starts his surgery sessions late. It's Mrs. Jones who always books her Friday afternoon session to be slightly less than the others. And you have people who are managing that capacity based on gut feel. And then on the other side, too much data, really difficult to see where are the key things I need to pay attention to. If you've got lists of tens of thousands of patients, how do we really see where those issues are, and how can you quickly get to what the different problems are, and what action you can take that can make a difference. So just an example of booking patients into theatres. So we've got a patient waiting list. In theory, we need to book these patients into the waiting list, which on the face of it seems quite simple. But in reality, what we need for that is some information on our waiting list. We need information on the preoperative status of the patient. Have they had a session with the anaesthetist? Are there any special things that need to come up about that? We need their theatre scheduling data. We need their theatre staffing data. And they come from 4 different systems who don't talk to each other. We have an added complexity in Northamptonshire in that we've got 2 different hospitals. So this is actually 8 different systems, which doesn't make it particularly easy. And then inputting the information into those systems, we've got the theatre team, we've got the specialty management team, we've got the surgeon themselves, we've got the theatre booking team, and then we've got the clinical and operational leadership. So very quickly, something that should be relatively straightforward gets to be quite complicated. So pulling together with the Trust CCS, we've pulled together, through Foundry, been able to pull together all these bits of data from the different directions they've come from, which is a really big step forward for us. It is really, really hard to be able to see all of our data in one place with the systems that we've got set up in the hospitals. We've then organised it, and organising it helps to bridge the gap between the different systems. And that can be as simple as linking data fields up. But for example, in Kettering, we include our endoscopy rooms in our theatre scheduling system. And in Northampton, we don't. We use a different system for endoscopy. So it helps to kind of make sure that we're looking at that properly. So we were quite pleased with this. But what we found is that the data by itself isn't necessarily that meaningful. So what I wanted to show you was how we started this work in June. So this graph, which is mostly covered up at the moment, shows you the usage of our system. So we launched in June, and you can see these are actions that people created in the tool to add another patient to a waiting list or to change their theatre schedule. You can see we went, oh, great, we've got 100 actions in the tool. Isn't that good? People are using it. They're finding it really helpful. And then what happened was it was very flat, and we really struggled to help people to understand after the initial you've been on the training to really embed it in the way that they're working and doing something different around the way that we're booking patients. So we kind of took a step back. So we've got our data, we've brought all of that together, we've organised it. But what we then went back to is trying to make it work for different levels. And we initially started with, well, what do I need as Director of Transformation? What do our Chief Operating Officers need? What do our medical directors need? And actually, that didn't really work for what the frontline teams needed, who we needed to input the data, high quality data, manage their workload. So work with the team to understand the workflow outside of the system. How are people doing that? What will be helpful for them, and built that around them. Really clear on the governance. So really helpful having this data. Which meetings is it going to be used in? How are we going to use it? How are we making sure that people are accessing the information? What decisions are we making with that? And how can we evidence that we've made the decision in the right way? Design that then with the people who are using the tool, and particularly in here, because we're entering data and information, we're saying we want to do an action and book this patient, or we want to remove them from the waiting list because they no longer need care. It's really important that we're understanding how people are using that information. And then a bit of a lesson. I mean, I'm a bit of a data geek, and I think for people who love data, bringing it all together is you get quite excited. Oh, we could do this and we could do that, and it'll totally transform the way that we operate. But I think we probably tried to eat the elephant all in one go, and taking some small bites, making sure it works for people, embedding it, testing it, means that we've then got a platform that we can go on and do more things with it. And really just making it as easy as possible for people to do this. So we are working with integrating it into some of our additional clinical systems that will help with some workflows. We have some robotic process automation in Northampton, so we're looking at how can we write back into our clinical systems, which again just takes away some of that, I guess, activation energy for people using the system. So we spent a bit of time kind of consolidating, what does that look like? And then you can really see that was when we really started to kind of take off in terms of usage of the system, which is all very well. People are using the system. But what does that really mean in reality? So this chart here is our theatre utilisation for our hospitals. So the blue line is what percentage, so at the top it's 95%, and the kind of bottom of where the line is about 45%. So what percentage of our theatre time are we spending operating on patients? And the blue line are all of the specialties who aren't using our tools, haven't put in place and embedded the processes because we're working through a kind of pilot approach. And then the pink line at the end are the specialties who are using it. And you can really see the difference between having that data, getting the workflow right, putting all of the governance there, the difference in utilisation between those two lines. That's the equivalent for us of around 2,500 patients a year. Who are getting more treatment, who are getting their waiting times shorter. And in Northamptonshire, we have some of the shortest waiting times in the country. So I will stop there, but hopefully that's a bit of an overview, I guess, of the journey we've been on bringing data together, and then what that means in terms of getting people who perhaps are not used to using data to integrate it into the way that they work.
Thank you very much, Becky. And thank you for giving us a new meaning of data bites, though I should stress no elephants were harmed in the making of tonight's event. We're going to go into the room for questions again. First, again, if you are online, please do use the Slido. It's bit.ly/SlidoDB39 if you're not there already. Who in the room would like to ask Becky a question?
I want to ask a version of the same question I posed to Palantir. It looks to me, I mean, if you were working in a different industry, you would be doing the stuff with data probably a little bit better. I mean, Amazon has to deliver parcels and they usually deliver them on time and they're organized and they don't have a mess behind the scenes. So the real question is, why is the NHS the way it is? What is the root cause of the fact that the data is not connected and people don't appear to know what to do with it well, until you get Palantir in, apparently.
That is a very big question. So I think the IT infrastructure of the NHS, it is piecemeal. That's partly due to the way that the NHS and the capital funding programmes work. It probably partly due to the National Programme for IT that people may or may not be aware spent quite a lot of money and didn't achieve the outcomes that it was intended to. And so that, I think, prevented quite a lot of the let's have a national system that means that all the systems are integrated and talk to each other, because when that was tried, it didn't work very well. I think until recently, and I'm probably talking the last 5 or so years, I don't think during some of the procurements of the IT systems, interoperability and data pipelining and being able to get data out was particularly well built into the specifications of some of these programs. So some systems are quite antiquated and the contracts haven't yet kind of come up for renewal. There is a program in the NHS at the moment to put all systems onto an EPR. So we have one in Kettering, actually. We don't have one in Northampton. And our systems in Kettering are substantially more joined up than the ones that we've got in Northampton. So I think we are on a journey in that direction. But we've still got the issue of the people systems don't talk to the healthcare systems, and how does that fit together? I also think that there hasn't been a great deal of historic investment in data analytics, data engineering, data science skills in the NHS. I have worked in the private sector before, and when you are trying to compete within the NHS pay structures for people who are high quality data analysts, data engineers, it is extremely difficult to compete against some of the salaries that people can get working for Amazon, working for other private organisations who can pay more. And I think there's been a lot of work since COVID. I think the value of data was really proven during COVID, all of the work around the vaccines, all of the work around the research into COVID treatments. That has meant there is now, okay, well, how do we grow our own within the NHS? But we are on the back foot with that, I think.
Thanks. I'm going to go online for the next question. This one is from Mark again. How much has data cleansing, in quotation marks, in Palantir reduced your waiting lists? And how many of those cleansed patients were later added to the back of that same list?
So we're in a different position than a lot of NHS organisations in that our waiting list was already quite clean. So we have cleansed a very small number compared to some other organisations who I know are in the pilot. So we've probably only cleansed around about 50 patients from our waiting lists. Now, partly we've got, as I say, a smaller waiting list than some of the rest of the country. But we had also spent a lot of time and money in doing a lot of that cleansing manually ourselves. So what we are expecting and hoping that Palantir will allow us to do going forwards is to do that in a more time-efficient way so that we can use that admin resource, that clinician time to do other things. But yeah, we are in a slightly different position than I know some of the other trusts who are on the pilot are in on that.
Great.
So as far as I'm aware, nobody's been added back on again. But it would be a very small number if that was the case.
Thanks. I'll come back in the room for the next question. We've got one down here.
Good evening, Becky. My name is Guneet. I am an analytics consultant at a boutique consulting firm called The Math Company. My question is regarding how did you go about procuring a solution, if you would want to call it, from Palantir? What is the process? Do you put up a problem statement? Is it a statement of work? Is it a contract? Is it a long-term deal? Because as a boutique consulting firm, we usually only work with Fortune 100 companies, but we would not even think about how do we go start working with NHS trusts. So could you just declutter or disentangle this mirage for us? Thank you.
So the pilot that we're on with Palantir is a national pilot, so the contracts are all held with NHS England, and then we are part of that pilot as part of the improving elective care program across the NHS. But I think your question is probably if we were to do something locally, how would we go about that? So the way that a lot of the NHS procurement works, there's a set of frameworks that are out there. Some of the big ones are there's Crown Commercial Services Framework. There's the NHS Digital Marketplace G-Cloud. And what we would normally do would be to, as you say, create a statement of work, put that out in terms of an ITT to some suppliers who were on that framework, and then go through a procurement process in terms of evaluating those bids for hitting the essential criteria and hitting value for money around what that looks like. Probably the main one from a digital perspective would be the NHS digital marketplace run by gov.uk.
Great, thank you. I'm going to go online for the next question. Anonymous, good evening to you, Anonymous, asks, the use of Foundry in the NHS is not without controversy. Do you have ethical concerns about doing so?
So it isn't without controversy. And we had some of those conversations. So I sit on both boards. We have had some of those conversations in boards. We have really strong information governance in Kettering and Northampton. Our teams have won national awards. We have for information governance, which can be a blessing and a curse when you're trying to get data shared. But in our case, we're really fortunate because it protects us as an organisation. And I put my trust in their professional understanding and ability around information governance, and that our data is secure. And I think the direct benefit that we are seeing at being able to better manage our patient waiting list and our operating theatres, I can point out the patients who have been treated quicker because of that. And that there are a set of very stringent data sharing, data processing agreements. Would I feel more comfortable if it was something that was entirely owned by the NHS? Yeah, of course I would. We're not in that situation in terms of that, and so we have to be reliant on some of the large data companies who are at the end of the day expert at what they do in this space. But I'm confident that the balance of risk sits on the side, certainly from the contracts that I've seen and read and looked at the data sharing agreements, the balance of risk, the benefits outweigh that for me.
Thanks. Very quick question, very quick answer, right at the back.
You mentioned data cleansing. If you're fixing errors in the data that's being imported into the Palantir system, is that going back into the patient record, which is held in the hospital? Because, of course, that is the base of truth. Yes, yeah, 100%.
So the way that it functions in our tool at the moment is people identify an error, it may flag that there's an error there, and it essentially creates an action which kicks off a workflow, and then somebody goes into the system and corrects it. What Palantir Foundry will then do is say, has that then been actioned in the system? So you can, it doesn't directly write back, which is helpful because obviously we've got user-based access control on some of our clinical systems. But what it does do is say, has that action been completed, yes or no? We are looking in a couple of cases about whether or not we can do some automatic write back, but we're just making sure that we are putting in place all of those user-based access controls so we don't have people making amendments to the records unnecessarily.
Brilliant. Well, unfortunately, we're out of time, but Becky, thank you very much indeed.
Thank Thank you very much for having me.